Hello, today we're going to talk about the Gothic art. So, the Gothic art evolved from Romanesque art and lasted from the mid-12th century and up to the end of the 16th century in some areas, especially we're talking about European countries. So the term Gothic has quite an interesting story of its formation. Actually, this term was given to this period by the classicizing Italian writers of the Renaissance, and this term had quite a negative side because actually it was a synonym for barbarism. The thing is that for the people of the Renaissance period, the beauty was something that looked like the antiquity art. And of course, Gothic is something very special, so something that has no analogues in antiquity or earlier or later periods then. So that's the reason why this style was not understood by those Renaissance scientists and art lovers. And so they decided that this was something really ugly because it was so far from the aesthetics of antiquity, and so this way from the aesthetic of Renaissance. And this term it was given in that period, and only, just let's imagine that only in the 19th century the scientists they finally realized that Gothic art is something very special, that it had nothing common with the tribes of Goths that once destroyed the Roman Empire. And so, but this term, it really remained a standard one in the study of art history. There is the periodization of the Gothic art. So we start with early Gothic period that lasted from the second half of the 12th century to the first quarter of the 13th century. Then mature or High Gothic that was in the 13th century. And finally, Late Gothic. Another title is Flaming Gothic, from 14th century up to 15th centuries. And as I have mentioned, in some countries we are dealing with the period from 14th century up to the end of the 16th century. Now let's consider firstly architecture, because it was really there were plenty of innovations in architecture, and we'll compare it to the previous period that is called Romanesque one. I remind you, by the way, that Romanesque, this term itself, is coming from it really shows this common items of common I can say features of architecture that Romanesque medieval period and style had with the previous one, so with the ancient Roman architecture. For example, semicircular arches that were widespread so much in Romanesque architecture. And firstly, there we remember that the orientation of this architecture, the architectural plan, was horizontal. So it was not straightening up to the skies. The walls were extremely thick, as we remember. It had some, I can say, defensive features. The windows were small, and in Gothic period, all these features they started to transform into something really different. So we'll see that this happened not in a moment, of course, but this process it lasted for several centuries. And finally, we'll see that Gothic architecture in its heyday, it was extremely high comparing to the previous architecture examples. So the windows became so wide, they were so much decorated with stained glass. That was possible only because of some new technologies that appeared, that were formed in this period, and thanks to some new architectural elements that also appeared. So these were lancet arch, firstly, lancet or pointed arch. It is it is like pointed Gothic arch, like lens. So that's the reason of its title, of course, we can see it. So the semicircular arch that is typical for Romanesque period was replaced by the lancet pointed arch. Then another thing is fan tracery. Fan tracery. It is a complicated style of the roof vaulting, elaborated, molded, in which the lines of the curves in the masonry of other material employed diverge equally in every direction. So we'll see here they are, these fan traceries. Then another term is buttress. Buttress is a projecting structure of a masonry or wood for supporting or giving stability to a wall or building. Another term is by the way, counterforce, I gotta show it to you. Here it is. Then flying buttress or arc-bouton. It's an open semi-arch that transmitting the arching to the buttress. So here they are, these arches. So they combine, we can say that they unite the wall, the main walls of the building with the buttress. Okay, so these are main terms here, and some other elements that are about decorating this, the Gothic architecture. These are pinnacles, they are decorative turrets completed with a pointed pyramid. Another is a crocket, carved stone leaves, then cruciferous flowers, or fleuron, in other words, carved stone flowers. Then chimeras. Chimeras, these are sculptured image of fantastic monsters. Gargoyle, these are figures, gutters. And gable or wimperk, pointed end above the window or entrance. So we should learn how to give all these right titles. We should learn to give the right titles to identify all these elements correctly. Let's do it again. So firstly, what can we see here? We can see, so that is like a fragment, the plan of a temple, Gothic temple. So actually the plan also had the basement of the main principle was in basilica type of structure. It also has inside the nave side aisles which are divided from the nave by the rows of columns. So first of all, let's repeat it. The pointed arch or lancet arch, here it is. Then we can see the usage of triforium. So what is that? I remind you, these are windows, like one window that is actually like divided into three parts by the rows of small columns. Then we can see here vaulting system that was highly used here. We can also notice these buttresses. Buttresses, I remind you that just take some weight on, like these are supporting parts of the building that take some weight on themselves. So they actually get this weight on themselves, and this way they can make the building stronger, and it really helped to create higher walls and bigger windows actually. And the flying buttresses are the structures that combine the wall of the building with the buttress. Then buttresses usually were decorated with the small pinnacles that are ending with such kind of pyramids here. Okay, these are main. Then let's take a look at the plan. So actually, as I have already mentioned, the Gothic temple had the typical basilica structure, but there was something new here. Firstly, we got a new term at the bay. In the Gothic as well as in the Romanesque structure, it is the space between architectural elements or races of compartments. The Gothic building is actually the system of bays. If in general, then Gothic architecture can be compared to stone lace, because it is highly decorated, not only from the exterior with many reliefs, with different with monumental sculpture, of course, with the pinnacles, gables, and so on, but also it is highly decorated inside, and this base, they also create this complicated structure inside. So even from the point of view of a plan, we can see that the inner space, it looks like such kind of wonderful pattern, very highly structured, and so it's divided into many parts together. The entrance, as usual, canonical, located from the western side. There is the main entrance. Actually, there could be several entrances as usual. Then we get inside of the main part of the church. So the part where those who worship God there usually stand during the liturgy, or just praying to saints, to the Lord himself, to the Virgin Mary. So this is the nave. The nave is divided by the rows of columns into aisles and the nave. Aisles are, as usual, they are smaller than the nave. Then classically there is a controversial part, a perpendicular part, that is is called transept. In transept part, so in the northern and southern portals, southern ends of it, we can also find the portals, like additional portals. Then we'll see in the eastern part, closer to the main apse, to the main part, the most sacred one, choir and a sanctuary, or it's also called ambulatory here. In the east, we can see an apse. As usual, it had the semicircular shape. Sometimes there could be several apses, and they could be not that huge, as not that big and spacious as we could notice it in, for example, Byzantine architecture. Then, what is special about the inner space? So the system of the pointed arch, it really helped to solve plenty of different architectural questions. So these are, like we can say, the main two constructive elements in the Gothic architecture that made it possible to construct the monumental building increasingly highest than we could see it in the previous periods, in Romanesque, for example. So the pointed arch itself, it is much more effective in the transmission of weights than the round arch, that is called Roman arch, used in the previous period of medievalism. And the ribbed dome, its support lies in the fasciculate pillars. So they are quadripartite, and also they have steri-ribbed form. Architecture was so much original in the Gothic period, and actually it had the principal structural characteristics, and it arose out of medieval masons' efforts to solve the problem associated with supporting heavy masonry ceiling vaults over wide spans. So the problem was that the heavy stonework of the traditional arched barrel vault and the groin vault, it's like so this problem was actual, and so the architects, they tried to solve it in different ways. Here we can see the Gothic cathedral interior. As usual, it is much more spacious than in the previous centuries. We can see a great amount of light inside, because of several rows of big windows on which sides of the cathedral, actually on all sides. predominantly the light is coming into inside from the southern and northern sides, and also from even the altar part was so it had the windows, so plenty of light, and the inner space was highly covered. It was covered with different sorts of marble, of stone. So that what reminds us the principle of the Roman architecture actually. For Gothic interior decoration, it's untypically we won't see there, for example, monumental painting on the walls and the ceiling. So I'm talking about fresco depictions. But instead we'll see great amount of colorful windows. So that are called stained glass. Inside we can also see that all the architecture, it gives us such kind of feeling of a wonderful lace and of a magnificent pattern. The plan of Gothic cathedral itself, and this principle is highlighted also in the interior decoration. For example, in the floor decoration here, all these patterns, they create a wonderful effect of the structure of the world that it has, of the universe itself, that it has, like, that it is structurized, that it has its order. There is no chaos in the God's created world. So that is one of the main ideas of this decoration. It also has symbolical nature. We can also notice that the images in the capitals, they are also informative. It contain these images. They contain the motives that symbolically remind us the Bible text. For example, these are the motive of grapes, of course, that are about the wine, and wine is about Eucharism, as we understand. So the Gothic capitals, we can't say that they were strictly canonical as Gothic as order system in antiquity, for example, but it was creative, very creative from the point of view of the reliefs, of the motives of the reliefs in the capitals of columns. We'll see that capitals sometimes were decorated not only with different floral motifs that could just symbolically remind us the Christian idea, and also show us some beauty of the world surrounding us, but also it could have some enlightening purpose. So sometimes it could even frighten. And we still remember that really Gothic, maybe it's probably it's also one of the reasons why in the Renaissance period Gothic was compared to something barbarian, because in Gothic architecture we'll frequently will find such kind of frightening images of different monsters, of some mythological creatures that can terrify the viewer, for example, as we can see it here. But we should not forget that all this, it is also an illustration of not only of the world, of everything heavenly that was created by the Lord, but it also reflects the universe from all its sides. It reflects the fact that the universe has everything good, and it the same way it has some evil side, and without evil we won't understand probably what is good. So we can claim that Gothic architecture is a model of the universe. We can see also that Gothic architecture, it differs not only throughout centuries, throughout its periods, but also it differs in some from the geographical point of view. In different countries, in different cities, it had its own there were some special features, as well as the Romanesque buildings, for example, that we have considered in previous lectures. We can notice that in time, throughout centuries, Gothic structures, Gothic cathedrals, they became higher and higher, and they reinforced an impression of soaring verticality. It all became possible because of making the structure, the principle, the new principles of architecture, this lancet or pointed arch system, for example, more perfect than it was in the previous periods. Here we can see, for example, the cathedral in Lana in France. It's the western facade here. Here we can see the features of the early Gothic architecture. So this first phase lasted from the Gothic style's inception so from the first part, actually, that started from the first part of the 12th century, and I remind you up to the beginning of the 13th century. So we can see that the cathedral in Lana, it is the example of the early Gothic period. So we can see that structures with some structures with the similar precise vaulting and chains of windows along the perimeter that we'll see later on in Notre Dame, the Paris Cathedral also. So the inner space is already quite wide and spacious here. The vaulting system is used, the faint tracery system is like accentuated here. So one of the principles of Gothic architecture is to make an impact on the structure of the building. So these features, like the skeleton of the building, actually originally in the previous centuries it was predominantly hidden by different decorative sides, by different other layers of architectural surfaces. But in this period, the architects and engineers, they decided that actually why they should hide it all, because the structure itself, it also looks quite beautiful and attractive. But again, we should notice that this wasn't understood by those people who were who just think the classical, only in the classical direction in architectural aesthetics. So here we can see a wonderful architecture of Notre Dame de Paris that was begun in 1163. So by this time it has become fashionable to treat the interior columns and ribs as if each was composed of the bunch of more slender parallel members of architecture. The early Gothic structures, they actually had thick, heavy walls still. Let's compare it to the Romanesque period. And sometimes there were not much changes from Romanesque proportions. We can still notice here in Notre Dame Cathedral that the plan is more it is more orienting on the horizontal line, not it does not have this strongly vertical tendency. And another features are the great length and little attention to the height, nearly equal emphasis on horizontal, and sometimes predominantly there was a horizontal line in plan, and sometimes they were equally horizontal and vertical lines. And then we see the elevations of the interior, the square terminations of the building in eastern end rather than semicircular ending. So that's what we'll see later on. Let's talk about the exterior now. So we can see also the great usage of different reliefs. We can see the round sculpture that are located as usually in niches, and these niches, they have also the lancet or pointed arch shape. Our attention is drawn by a wonderful elements that are called big rose windows. So actually, rose window is a symbol of the Virgin Mary, and so that's also the fact that many cathedrals were dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and this one also, by the way. So that also reflected in the decoration, in the architecture. We can see here also buttresses, high usage of them, and flying buttresses. We can notice here pinnacles. We can see here the usage of very small elements sometimes that create this effect of stone lace. Inside, we can notice that also that spacious. This example of architecture is spacious. The interior is decorated with stone everywhere. And we can also notice this vaulting system that really creates the feeling of beauty of architectural volumes themselves. So we can ask ourselves a question: if probably if it is necessary, if it was necessary to give some additional decoration to this inner space, for example, to paint the ceiling with some frescoes. And probably the answer no, we should not do that, or it is something extra, something unnecessary, because the architecture is expressive itself. All these architectural shapes, they are so individual, they are so special, they are so they are fulfilling the interior with enough information, aesthetics information. And more than that, the light that is coming from the windows, the plenty to the windows is very important. So the rose windows here, so-called triglyphs, so-called triforiums or biforiums. These are windows that have two sides of it. So all two parts of it. So everything decorated, all these windows decorated with stained glass, they gave this amazingly beautiful effect inside. So the like plane of lights and shadows inside. So it seems that the inner space, like the walls, they are already quite picturesque because of this lighting. Here we can see the plans from Notre Dame de Paris Cathedral. We can see the general plan. There is also the central part, the nave and aisles, several rows of aisles, the base system here, and transept part also can be seen. And we can see several rows of buttresses and flying buttresses here that also creates this effect of weightless construction. The capitals in Notre Dame Cathedral are decorated with a great amount of, I can say, of imagination, of sculptures, of artists. So we can see plenty of motifs. We can see that all the creatures, sometimes some evil creatures, sometimes the good creatures, they are all depicted with a great attention to even to the portraits of all these figures. Is paid here. Sometimes we can notice the motifs that remind us antiquity architecture, for example, the Ionic elements, here in Notre Dame de Paris, there is an amazingly beautiful, picturesque stained glass window of the main road, especially. The main road is usually located above the main entrance to the cathedral that is in the western side. This window was created circa 1220. We can see from the slide that the images are quite decorated. They are, that they are flattened. The style is two-dimensional here, and that is typical just for stained glass depictions, because they are created from different surfaces that are close to each other. For example, like like here, so we can see the local, it is so-called local coloring of the clothes of the hero. We can see another local colors combinations. So several main colors are chosen here, and we can see that this magnificent stained glass, it is combined of the bright blue, bright red, and ochre yellow colors. So these are three main colors of the rainbow, and so I remind you why we say they're main, because they can't be mixed out of any other source of colors, so they are always pure. And from the great distance we can feel this optical mixture of colors effect. So from the great distance, for example, if they are close red and blue, then we can feel it like as if it is violet color. We can find the plentitude of not only of reliefs, the decoration of capitals, but also round sculpture that are like illustrations of the Bible text. Actually, the Gothic architecture and sculptures, they are quite emotional, so they do not they leave some they make some impact on the viewer. Sometimes they can frighten, sometimes they can inspire, sometimes they can create the feeling of awe-inspiring. So it's like when we want to fall down on the knees and to pray to the Lord and to express our inner statement. We want to pray looking at some images inside, though there are no icon paintings inside. There are no images of the Bible story inside, but everything is in fresco depictions, but everything is expressed through sculptures, expressed through stained glass images. Here is another masterpiece, Reims Cathedral, that was founded in 1210. That is already the High Gothic period, or also it's called Mature Gothic period. It is the second phase of Gothic architecture and during this period a significant change took place in Gothic architecture. About 1250, we'll see that Gothic architects, they concentrated on the harmonious distribution of masonry, and particularly that happened in France, and on the technical, and also they were concentrated on technical items, technical problems of achieving greater height. So after this period, after this date, they became more concerned with the creation of rich visual effects through decoration. So we'll see that in mature Gothic period, the architecture became higher, more spacious, and much more decorated than it was in the early Gothic period. The decoration took such forms as pinnacles, that are upright parts of architecture. They are also spired, so these are, I remind you, these are exterior elements. Also decorated moldings, and especially window tracery, of course. And the most characteristics and finest achievement of the style is in that period is the great circular rose window adorning the west facades of large French cathedrals especially. So here let's take a look what we can see from that is the western facade. There are three entrances here. The main entrance is bigger than the side entrances. We can see that the western part is decorated traditionally with at least one huge rose window, but here in the case of Reims Cathedral you can see even two rose windows here. In the mature or High Gothic period we can also see the plentitude of sculpture decorations of the facades of the cathedrals and churches. So here, for example, we can notice plenitude of decoration in the western facade. Wimperk visually enforcing the verticality of the building, and we can see that it was highly decorated with the images of saints. Here, for example, we can see the Virgin Mary. Here we can see the encrowning of her by the Lord, and also the victims of this event. The angels that are, according to the sacred texts, are usually close to God. Also, we can notice that the portals, the archivolt is decorated with semicircular images. So actually these are reliefs, high reliefs. The images of saints that are usually depicted with the gesture of praying, because these saints, they are praying for all people who are entering the church. They are praying for those people who are alive, just to blame God for giving them opportunity to enter the eternal life. Here we can see also that these images of saints, they are located also in different types of niches in Wimperks also as well. So we can notice that there are flerons here. So the flerons are the small elements that are like flowers, remind us flowers. All sorts of decorations. Actually, we can say that these are new types of decorations. We couldn't see such kind of sculptures, architectural elements in the previous centuries. The buttresses are decorated with pinnacles and also with the figures of saints inside. So we can see that the creative thought of the architects of sculptures reached the very high level. Also, we can notice that there are plenty of symbolical elements. For example, here we can see the depiction of royal lily. Lily also is a symbol of purity, of the Virgin Mary, of the moment of Annunciation. And here we can see the so-called flaming decoration in architecture. One of them is called here, this one is like the rose window also, and another one is like fish bubble. Flaming Gothic decorations, they are all very elaborate, they are detailed. Here are also the depictions on at the entrance to the cathedral. We can see again, I like to underline this, that sculptures in that period, they try to move away from a too high level of realism, because the realistic features, they draw people's attention away from the inner idea, from spiritual idea of these images. So that's why from one point of view, we can notice some influences that are coming from antiquity architecture, and from another point of view, the sculptures are covered totally with heavy draperies, and they create the feeling of the effect of architectonics. Architectonic in sculpture, that is when we see something equal in the structure, in the massiveness of folders, for example, in the posture of figures, something equal with the character of architecture in general. So this quality of sculptures, it helps to create the unity of them with architecture. Here we can see the Reims Cathedral interior. I'd like to mention about the changes that happened to the stained glass in the High Gothic period. So formerly, stained glass in the early Gothic period, it was deeply colored, and now it became lighter in color to increase the visibility of tracery silhouettes and to let more light into the interior. The most notable examples are the cathedrals in Reims, Amiens, Bourges, and Chartres. We'll see them later on. Okay, so the inner space is also totally, we can see, made of inlaid with marble, totally made of stone. There, of all the monumental depictions, there are only stained glass windows here. They are also quite picturesque and polychromic. In the transept of the Reims Cathedral, there is a magnificent rose window that creates a powerful lightning effect on the walls, and together with the reliefs that cover totally the wall, and together with the architecture of lancet type arcs, so they create this wonderful this wonderful aesthetics of the Gothic architecture that is like the stone lace. Here we can see the Amiens Cathedral. So the Amiens Cathedral is dedicated to Notre Dame, or to Our Lady. It is the largest one in France from the point of view of its scale. General scale reaches up to 200,000 square meters. The author of the project is Robert de Luzarche. So the transept, what is special about the plan? The transept is moved to the western part of the cathedral. We can also see the plenitude of sculpture decorations in the exterior as well as inside the cathedral. The cathedral was erected for quite a long period, from the first half of the 13th century, and was ended in the 16th century. So let's consider the western facade. It is highly decorative. We can see the three entrances here. The central one is traditionally bigger. There is the decor of the archivolt that is like in framing of the doors. There is a lunette or tympanum with the images from the gospel, and so we'll consider it later on in details. Also the wimperks used here, also fleurons decoration, the motif of royal lily as usual, so different niches like imitation of biforium, like doubled window. Here we can see it. The usage of arches, small arches, and a plenitude of compositions made of pinnacles. Also we can notice here the huge window rows, like it is in the central part, so it usually draws our attention for just firstly. Okay, we can also see, of course, the Gothic lancet type arches, and plenty of different other small decorations. And now let's consider the tympanum image, the relief on the western portal of Amiens Cathedral. So we can see that the composition is divided into several rows. So there are 4 lines in which the central one is the most important because of the image of Jesus Christ here, and also according to the canonical iconography, we can see that here is also the image of Jesus Christ, like double image here in one composition. So let's now read the message, the main message. So the generally this image refers to the moment of the last to the last judgment day. We can see here in this part Jesus Christ presides over last judgment. The motive of praying here from both sides, saints, people, angels, they are all turning to Jesus and praying him for mercy. There above we can see Christ with 2 swords. Below we can see the motive that Saint Francis leading figures of righteous to heaven, and on the other side we can see that a demon pushes figures into hell. Here angels depicted. Then at the lower part of the composition we can see Archangel Saint Michael or Michael with weights, like waiting souls, and angels are, they blow the trumpet that that means the start of the last judgment day. And on the sides we can see that dead awakening and are also getting ready for being judged by the Lord. And in above the tympanum in archivolt there is plenitude of images, figurative images of different saints and of angels who are all predominantly they're depicted with a gesture of praying, so they're praying the Lord for mercy. In Amiens Cathedral, we can see in the interior, we can see that for the first time there is the usage of the stereo rib vault that accentuate the geometrical center of the cathedral. So we can notice from this image how spacious it is really, and we can see the usage of order systems, but these are Gothic type of columns when several columns placed together, and they create this special relief effect. Also we see the usage of monumental statues, and in the altar part there is it's very important that there is the stained glass. Stained glass is usually very informative, and in this plan I want to mention it again that inside, by the way, the cathedral that has as usual the plan of basilica type structure. The entrance is located from the western side as usual, and transept, as I have mentioned, it is moved slightly to the western part of the cathedral. What else can we see? That the inner part is divided by the rows of arcade into three parts, nave and aisles, and also there is a semicircular apse here. By the way, apse is here. Then ambulatory is the next thing, just coming deeply into the plan. And there are several chapels here. The latest chapel, and the one of them is the latest chapel. Okay. Here we can see the Rouen Cathedral that was created from 1145 to 1880. Its general length reaches 137 meters. The facade's width is 61 and 6 meters. Then nave width is 11.3 meters, nave height is 28 meters, and spire height is 151 meters. So this Rouen Cathedral is dedicated to Notre Dame, so again to Our Lady. From 1876 to 1880, it was considered being the highest building in the world, and then after 1880, it was replaced by this title was replaced by Kern Cathedral. Despite the fact that this cathedral was had been erected for centuries, all its parts look like harmonious structure, like an true architectural ensemble. So the central spire, we can see it here. It is comparatively darker than other parts of the building. So the spire originally refers to 1557. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by fire and reconstructed totally in the 19th century. Now also let's pay our attention to the rich decorations in relief from the western facade. There are again three main entrances here, the plenitude of images of saints, Wimbergs, then fleurons, then again archivolts and tympanums here. Okay. Here we can see the plan. We can see the again rose window above the central entrance, and the images, all images, they are like illustrations to the Bible text. Especially they are concentrated on the topic of the Last Judgment Day. So this way they bring people, they remind people about the main things in the life. That after all, each of us is going to give the answer for the earthly life. Okay, here is the stained glass image. The stained glass was created in the 13th century, and it has a very special hue of the blue color that is called charter blue, as it was firstly invented and used. I mean, this technology of creating this blue, bright blue color for stained glass, it was used for the first time in Chartres Cathedral, and so we can see it also here. We can notice that the stained glass images, they create such kind of effect of a magnificent pattern, and when we look at it more attentively and in details, then we can see all the images that they are also like illustrations to the sacred texts. Inside we can notice that so inside we can see that the interior of Rouen Cathedral is comparing to other Gothic structures is really polychromic. So we can see the usage of colorful marble. We can see also the covering of these columns and of the vaulting system on all the walls with such kind of very tiny patterns that with the motifs of the royal lilies here and other floral motifs. In vaults we can see the motif of starry skies, and the ribbed system is like underlined with the golden color, gilded surface. So inside, this way inside we can see the plenitude of blue colors, and this really creates this magnificent feeling of eternal space, of really heavenly space. Chartres Cathedral is also dedicated to the Virgin Mary, so it is called Notre Dame Cathédrale de Chartres. The building has quite an interesting structure. Actually, it has a great influence still of the Romanesque architecture. Especially, we can notice it from the general plan. So it is more horizontally oriented. We don't see here the predominance of vertical lines. The building has a typical Latin cross plan, and it has three naves. The eastern part has several semicircular chapels. Here in this cathedral, for the first time, flying buttress system was used, and this really helped to create. It made it possible to create the bigger windows than we could see in the Romanesque period. One of the features of architecture are two towers, so we can see it, we can notice it just from the first glance that they really differ from each other. So what's the reason for that? The southern tower was created in 1140, here it is, and it has a Romanesque influence. It's quite simplified comparing to the to the northern one. And another tower, here it is, it was created in the 16th century in flaming Gothic style already. The cathedral has 9 portals, and totally generally we can see also the great amount of sculpture, decorations, reliefs, and so these sculptures in general we can count up to 10,000 sculptures in general decorations of the cathedral. In the western facade, above the entrances inside, we can see the illustrations created in stone that refer to the Old Testament times and also to the New Testament period, especially dedicated to the Virgin Mary life. The high inside we can notice. Okay, let's firstly consider this. So we can see again the great impact on the decoration of the western facade, as it had the purpose to create a special visual effect and to prepare the visitor to think of high spiritual items. The images, the sculptural images are really highly stylized here. We can see such kind of form of dematerialization of figures. The proportions are a little bit changed comparing to antiquity, for example, and in general to realism. And these images are clear illustration to the Bible. For example, here we can see Abraham sacrifice his son Isaac. These are sculptures of the northern portal of Notre Dame Cathedral in Chartres. Inside we can see a very special stained glass. These are this is the only example of Gothic cathedrals in France that almost totally preserved its stained glass till nowadays. The specificity of the stained glass images is a high saturation of these glass colors, and this creates a very special decorative effect. Inside the cathedral we can see that there is a wonderful image on the floor. This is the labyrinth image. It has symbolical meaning of the way of the person to God. Here we can see the Cologne Cathedral that is located in Germany. It is the third one among the highest churches in the world. It was founded in 1248 and finished in 1880. Its general height 157 meters. It is the most Gothic church in Germany. That means that it has all typical elements of this period. The high central nave is one of its specific features. It has plenty of triforiums. We can see them here in the exterior photographs. All the configuration with the interplacement of stone ornamentation create the general feeling of aspiration to God as praying. This cathedral is dedicated to Saint Peter and Mary. Here we should again let's return for a while to one of the main terms that we should use in when we talk about the Gothic architecture. These are feint tracery. Actually, they emphasize these elements. They emphasize the structure of the building. They really make this impact on the structures that originally, before the Gothic period, were hidden somehow. And sometimes in Gothic churches, we can see even that these such kind of elements as vaulted system and feint tracery, they could be decorated as in Basilica of Saint Francis of Assisi in Italy, 2028, the year of foundation. So Gothic architecture is really very various. We can see it from the usage of architectural elements and through the way of their decoration. And here we consider the facade, the western facade of Milan Cathedral. That was the original building was founded in 1386 and completed in 1965. So by the way, you have already noticed that many churches of the Gothic period were built throughout centuries, and that really caused some interesting combinations of architectural elements. For example, the elements of early Gothic period, they could be combined together with the elements of a later period. But here is the example of the flaming Gothic architecture, and now let's underline again the main features of it. So in late Gothic architecture, the wall space was reduced to the minimum of supporting vertical shafts to allow an almost continuous expanse of glass and tracery. Structural logic was obscured by the virtual covering of the exteriors of building with tracery, which often decorated masonry as well as windows. A profusion of pinnacles, gables, and other details such as subsidiary ribs and so in the walls to form the star patterns further complicated I can say they like developed the general complicity of the total effect. In England, the style of in that period also had its features. So we'll talk about it a little bit later. And here is Saint-Chapelle Cathedral in France. This architect Pierre de Montereau. So in the High Gothic period, the great usage, the windows became even higher than they used to be in the previous periods. It is like the highest level of when architecture reached its highest peak in the development of all specific details. So for example, if there were some tendencies in Gothic architecture from the beginning, then in this period, this is the heyday of this of all this specificity. So the vertical lines are really tending to the Lord, tending to heavens, and all the architectural elements, they like underline this. So in a late Gothic period, or in other words, flaming Gothic, we can see all these vertical lines in the stone tracery of windows, an enlightenment of windows to great proportions, and the conversion of the interior stories into the single unified vertical expanse. There in this period were highly used the typical pointed vaults, but in time they were replaced by fan vaults. And among the finest examples we can also see St. Vitus Cathedral in Prague. Here we can notice the plenitude of all decorative and first of course constructive elements typical for the Gothic architecture. We can see, okay, let's name some of them again. So these are pointed arches, these are fan tapestry, these are different pinnacles, flairons, and flying buttresses also. We can also see gables, and here are gargoyles that have some usefulness in them. So they're used as gutters. By the way, I want to underline here. So what motifs are depicted in? Again, in tympanum, as usual, these are like illustrations to the sacred text of the Bible. The images of angels are used here. Unfortunately, only partly all the sculptural decoration of archivolt is preserved till nowadays, but anyway, we can feel this majesty of this amazing architecture. Here are the images in St. Vitus Cathedral stained glass. These stained glass images were created in the 19th century and in the 20th century also. So we can see that they really differ from the examples from the medieval times. These stained glass are variable from the point of view of the compositions. So compositions are more lifelike. They are not that highly stylized as we could see it in medievalism. So the impact is here on on realistic proportions, on dynamicism in compositions. The images are extremely polychromic, and also we should know that and there is also famous composition in stained glass, the allegory of a Slavic nation, created by famous artist Alphonse Mucha from 1928 to 1931. The finest examples of the late Gothic architecture are located in England. So here, for example, we can see All Souls College of the University of Oxford in English, founded in 1438. The full title of this structure is, or we can say the official title is The Warden and the College of the Souls of All Faithful People Deceased in the University of Oxford. So we can compare this type of architecture to the previous examples that we have talked about today. And what can we see? So the main difference is, of course, because of the purpose of the structure. So that were the examples of religious architecture, and this is college structure. That's why it has quite different architectural composition. It has the inner yard as we see it, but all the elements but here the elements typical for Gothic period are used, and that what really creates this general view of Gothic period. Here are the interiors of King's College Chapel in Cambridge. Here it is. And we should pay our attention to the wonderful decoration of vaulting system. These are types of revaults when we see that the impact is made on fan tracery structure itself. And here's the photo of the interior of Oxford University Museum. Also, we can see typical elements of Gothic architecture. And now let's sum up the terminology that we have considered today. These are architectural decorative elements of Gothic architecture. The typical plan of Gothic period temple. So I remind you that in the basement of the structure is basilica type. With the same elements that are typical for basilicas of the previous period and of Byzantine period. But the difference is that the main part of the church is divided into bays. It has more complicated, I can say, more detailed type of plan. And but the main thing is a Christian church remains like the imago, the image of the sheep. So the sheep that brings the righteous people to through the rough waters of life to reach heavens. That's why we see some terminology like nave, for example. It refers to marine terminology. Here are most widespread examples of vault system that was used during the Gothic period, from early Gothic to later Gothic. So this is barrel vault that is more typical for the previous Romanesque architecture. Then groin vault and revault. Then we'll see the usage of triple lancet windows, of course, with a motif of like stained glass rose, so-called rose windows. We'll see cross walls like here, like in the previous slide we have seen. Then fleurons, gables, like fronton above the windows, above the entrances. Here it's fleuron, another example of it. Then pinnacles, crockets like this, and lancet and pointed arches. So all these types of architecture, all these elements, these are the most typical, the most common for Gothic period. And now we have here the quiz, architectural elements of Gothic temple. So please take some time and think of the titles. Let's remember them. Thank you for your attention and see you in the next lectures.